Welcome to the East End Education Forum. I'm your host, Bob Tymann, and today we have two fantastic guests. First, Georgia Flight, an English teacher from East Hampton High School, and Greg Metzger, a marine biology teacher from Southampton High School. Thank you both for coming. And today we're going to have a discussion about project-based learning. And we have two veteran teachers one who I believe your natural way of thinking and working and teaching would be project-based. And then Georgia, I think you probably come from a more traditional mindset when you began teaching. So shifting to project-based was probably a new learning curve for you.
That's fair to say.
So let's start. You're teaching now the AP seminar.
Yes.
Which is a project-based curriculum.
In part, yes,
In part.
I would say so. In terms of English language arts, it has a lot more student choice and sort of some more kind of a real world feel than your traditional English classroom in high school. Because I also teach English 11 and now English 9 as well. So in your traditional literature-based courses, you usually the content is sort of what leads it, not so much the skills. The skills come along with, but it's very heavily content-based on the classic works of literature. Whereas with AP Seminar, we don't read any literature at all. It's all research and presentation-based, so it's really more of a communications class, is how I think of it.
So how would you define, in that context, how would you define project-based?
Well, from my understanding, I took a course last year that Peconic Teacher Center offered about called Project-Based Learning Curriculum Development Certification. And the teacher there was, well, it was last year, so it was virtual, but the teacher was this woman named Dr. Amy Bader, and she was really interesting, and she sort of defined it, it was for obviously all subject areas, defined project-based learning as anything that is sort of student-led, that has a real audience if possible, that has a sort of tangible product if that's also possible, and that has some real world, at least implications, if not, real world sort of results within that. Sometimes, depending on the subject, that can be harder to do, but at least has something that you could take into the real world in a more tangible way than you could, let's say, with the more abstract skills that you might learn in an English class. So AP Seminar is a College Board course, so of course you can't, you do have some freedom with the curriculum, but some of the things they do provide for you. But we have a lot of leeway. The other AP Seminar teachers and myself have a lot of leeway to give the students some level of instruction and then see what they do with it. So we explain to them what we're trying to get to, what the sort of goals are with their skills, and we let them come up with ways to express that they know those skills and with ways to kind of choose what sort of content they want to use to show us that they can get there.
So students right up front are made aware of what they're supposed to learn by doing this?
Yes, definitely. That gives them some sort of a goal. I think it's very hard to get students invested in anything unless they can see where it's going. You want them to think, okay, and you don't just want to say, listen, you need to learn how to present. You really need to explain to them why they need to learn how to present. You need to try to help to explain to them that, no, you may not have a job where you're giving presentations all day, every day, but every job interview that you do, no matter what kind of job you do, every sort of party that you go to where you meet new people, I mean, those sort of skills are extremely important in your life. So you have to think about, how do I get better at this? And that's what we're trying to teach in the class.
Greg, you're in a different situation. Kind of first explain to the audience your curriculum, your setting.
Yeah.
Because it is different.
Yeah. So my classroom, if you walk into it, looks like you're going to an aquarium. You were there a few weeks ago. It's a very non-traditional classroom. Everything that's in there, though, is by design and purposeful, because it is a classroom. So nothing in there is just random. The space is basically about a 2,000 square foot classroom. It has over 50 species of marine organisms in there, everything from seahorses, giant clams, corals, ornamental fish that you would commonly find at a pet shop, or that if you have saltwater aquariums at home, you might have in our that we have in our facility. There's about 5,000 gallons of salt water total in over 100 different fish tanks, varying in size from 15 gallons up to 1,200 gallons. We have 2 different species of sharks in our lab. We have a mangrove forest growing. So it's a pretty sophisticated wet lab. The floor is a single monolithic floor with 7 or 8 floor drains in it. We have hoses, and wet feet are a commonality in our room. But this is our classroom. This is the space that we teach the marine science courses in. It's also a fully functioning ornamental aquaculture facility. So what that means is aquaculture is farming fish. And so we have the facility that is able to complete the life cycle on the species that we have. So basically that means we purchase or have donated broodstock, which are parents. We house them, we keep them fat, dumb, and happy, as we like to say, and they produce eggs or babies of live birth, depending on what the life cycle is. And then those larvae or eggs are hatched and raised through metamorphosis and development. In some cases, we'll keep those, and those will become broodstock future years down the road. So it's a very unique classroom. Lots of room for authentic hands-on learning.
Well, right before we were on the air, we were discussing this and the automatic feedback you get, because what was the phrase you used? If you don't do it right.
Yeah, so unfortunately in our business, if you screw up, things die or are injured or impacted negatively.
Right.
So one of the comments from a former student was that they enjoyed the instant gratification of their learning. And whether that was that they learned they did it right the first time, or they learned that they didn't quite do it right the first time, there's immediate impact and real buy-in. So it's not like, I only got a 70 on the test. It's like, well, you just, wiped out an entire month's worth of work in 5 minutes because you didn't take the time to read the directions. So there's lots of, like you were just saying, Georgia, real world applicable skills that students, as they go through my courses, have an opportunity to really see. Like, did you read the instructions? Yeah. Okay, then how come the salinity is 0? You used fresh water instead of salt water because you didn't read the directions well enough. And so if that would have been put into the fish tank, or if that would have been used to raise your algae wouldn't have been as successful. So, so reading for instruction, reading for accuracy, these things they have been hearing for years, but it's had no real meaning, no real meat to them. Like, oh, all right, so I redo it. It's like, you can't redo it,
Right.
So.
In most traditional classrooms, the motivation is the grade. And I know most teachers don't get this, but there are some students who don't care about the grades. Now, how do we motivate that student? That student is going to, in your classroom, say, oh God, I really messed up here. It's real. There are real consequences, as opposed to a traditional classroom where in some future year, you might not get the college scholarship that you might not even want to get.
Right.
Which is not much in the motivation area. And it's all extrinsic motivation. Very little intrinsic, how does this help me and my future? Do you see different students succeeding in your AP classroom, in that project-based classroom, that you don't think would do as well in a traditional classroom, and vice versa?
Well, I think something about seminar, first of all, the AP students are generally, there's no really official test at the high school to get into the AP class. Anybody can join it. So it is generally the students who either are motivated to try a harder class, or their parents are. And in some cases, those aren't the same, students, which, happens. But I think that what they kind of have in common, it doesn't really either matter, because I try to express to them right at the beginning of the year, and in my other classes as well, that progress is success. That's the only way to measure your success. So if you get 100 on everything, you have no way of measuring what that means. That becomes meaningless, because that means that you knew all of this already before you came in. So why are you here? So they obviously want to get good grades, and they're not used to sort of a punitive kind of a, sword to wield. But at the same time, you need to realize that you are not equally proficient in every area, and let's identify for you what you want to improve. And for them, they just think, well, some of them, the grade motivated ones, well, I just want to improve everything because I just want to get 100 on everything. So then when you get a little bit more down into the skills that I was talking about, then you think, well, what skills would you like to work on? And this, almost all of them will say, they're in 10th grade, these seminar kids, most of them will say, I don't like speaking, I don't like presenting. Or some of them will say, I'm a terrible writer. And some of them will say, I don't really understand things that I read. I think, I can get the gist, but I'm not great at so-called reading comprehension, the way they think of it with those the only way they've been tested on that really is with those multiple choice questions. But, so all three of those things are so important, like as you were saying, for every subject, right? If you don't read things carefully, or if you kind of just skim and you're not really aware of what you're reading, things can die. Not so much in my classroom, but, in life, if they are working anywhere, and a lot of them have summer jobs, I try to talk about, okay, you're working, some of them work for their families, heating or air conditioning or something where you have to read instructions, where you're doing things with machinery, boat mechanics, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You have to know how to break down things that are complicated translate them into words that you can understand and that you can use. So I know that kind of got away from your question, but it was really more about grades, but trying to get them to identify what they need to improve is what I think is kind of what is the payoff.
You're getting to it, it's making the learning theirs.
Right.
They ownership of both what they're going to learn, why they're going to learn it, and I think most importantly, the pathway they're going to take to learn it. That's where the piece of having some student voice and choice in project-based learning becomes so important, because you're not going to tell everybody, here's what you're going to research in my class.
Right.
That would be self-defeating.
Disastrous.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there's one piece of the course that I have every student, regardless of what their project is, read. And they're not even reading it. It's just, it's a single scientific paper that outlines very simply what a scientific paper is in terms of the layout and the way that it's structured and the language. And that's really why it's just one good one that I found. Other than that, the students really, it really is, each student is doing an individual class. I have no control over what their choice is, what their topic is. I help to facilitate and guide them to something that's realistically able for them to accomplish by the end of the year. And, my evaluation is based on, real conversations with them. How much time do you really have to give this course? And be honest. Right. You have 4 study halls, but if you're in 5 AP classes, and you work 3 jobs after school and you babysit on the weekends, if you only have the 40 minutes of class time to work on this, that's okay. But we're going to structure a project that is obtainable for you, because I think that's the other piece that goes along with sort of that intrinsic motivation is if the hill is so high that in your brain there's no way you can get there, it takes a special person to keep trying, Yes. And in today's day and age where there's a lot of instant gratification that's wanted, it's like, it's very few that are going to try to climb that mountain knowing that they can't do it. And so I think scaling the making, at least in my research class, an obtainable project with real conversations, just helps to keep things moving.
Well, I think research will show that all learning, for an individual to invest in learning, new learning, they have to feel like it's achievable. And if it's out of that, I hate to use the term, zone of proximal development, if it's out of that zone, you're really not going to give it your best effort because you don't feel like your effort would ever get rewarded. That's kind of, when you think about it that way, it's kind of common sense. It's kind of, most adults, most of us would react the same way.
I agreed, and I think like little measurable checkpoints as you go along are really important, especially the younger the students are. I mean, I don't know which grades you're.
Yeah, so mine are 9 through 12.
Okay.
So anybody could come in at any point in time. You could come in as a ninth grader and take the same course. You could continue with the project that you started the year before. You could modify it. You could do something totally different. I run the course basically like a master's program. So you come in, you have to, come with, we'll get you on the map. Like, where are you on the map as far as, like, do you have an interest in something that you're, because that's the real hook for my course, is to try and get them to ask a question they're so excited to know the answer to, they're willing to overcome any obstacle. So I can't read. I don't know anything about fish tanks. I'm allergic to salt water. Like, okay, whatever your situation is, if you want to learn, if you want to know the answer to your question, you'll be willing to do whatever it needs to overcome those obstacles. And so that's the real hook for me, is to try to, where are these students? What is it that they're interested in that will give them that motivation to keep going?
So if a student came into your classroom as a ninth grader
Yep.
and looked at the setup, which is incredible,
Thank you.
but wanted to understand how you keep the water running through this system and without killing the fish, would that be an area you would?
Yeah, so you're on the map. So I would say that you've come into the lab and you're on the map. So you're interested in water chemistry, water circulation. You're interested in how these animals are kept
Which is
alive.
more physics than bio.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're okay. So then what we would do is we would sit and have a real conversation about, well, what is it that you're really interested in? Like, talk to me. And there might be 2 or 3 or 5 things. And so then what happens is, okay, so you need to start educating yourself on these areas. So you might ask questions about certain things. And so now that's where I can introduce how to find information. Right?
That's
There's
a
a
big
lot
part.
more than just Google and Wikipedia
Right.
out there.
Yeah.
There's
That's
a lot
become
more than
increasingly
just
important.
YouTube. There's a lot more. So what now? I've got a hook. If it was like, okay, class, today we're going to go to the library and learn how to use it, forget about it. Like, the students aren't going to be into that. But now I got a kid that needs to know the physics of water.
Right.
Okay, well, there's other places. So let's go talk to the librarian and see what she has to offer. And so now there's a kid that is excited skipping down to the librarian, as opposed to dragging them down there. So
Skipping?
we're on
Well,
TV, so
all
I
right,
gotta
all
make
right.
it seem like, things like but no, I mean, now you have a student that's genuinely interested in trying to get information to allow them to keep moving forward. And so if they find the answer to their question, great, you found the answer to your question. There's no reason to go through the scientific research, scientific method to, but one question leads to another question, leads to another question. So where they may come in September interested about the husbandry of the water, as we start walking around the lab and looking at things, it might evolve. Or as they start, we've all done that. You start out clicking on something, and 2 hours later you're in completely the opposite direction, but it was all good stuff. And so that's part of the adventure. That's part of the research adventure is it's just having a start and then just see where it leads. But ultimately, it's keeping that excitement, and it's forcing them to get to a point where they can't find the answer. Now, that's where we can.
Right, where there is no simple yes or no. There is no here's the multiple choice answer.
Every
But it's
student
more
is
complicated.
asking a unique, unknown question. Now, I am not over their shoulder micromanaging their literature search of the work that's out there. But if they can't find it after I've given them, the suggestions for where to go, and the librarian has given them their suggestions, if they haven't found it using those tools, they've learned those tools. They learn about databases and Google Scholar and
learn what they're not.
interlibrary loans. And
Yeah.
so if they've gone through their checklist and they haven't found the answer, I'm okay with that. They've gone through the process.
Right.
So I'm taking basically a master's or PhD program, a 2 to 3 year program, or a 5 to 7 year program, and literally condensing it into an 8-month program. So you have to cut corners somewhere. And so those, I look at it as this course is an introduction to the scientific method into a science research course, rather than having them, complete a master's degree in
Right.
publications. But there is that option. A student comes in as a freshman or a sophomore or junior, and they're on that, we have the capacity, we have the
I
network.
met some of those students the other day.
We have the capacity, we
Impressive.
have the network that, could foster a student at any level that they choose to come in at.
In both of these scenarios, where does failure come in the learning process?
Well, early and often, I would say.
Yeah.
But just as Greg was saying about research question development is a huge part of what we do too. And it doesn't, obviously the research the students are doing for a seminar is not scientific, but it has to be, they have to form their own unique questions. And I have minimal influence on what they decide to research. But they have to develop a topic, but they right away often realize there's nothing on this. They'll say, there's nothing out there about it. I said, really? There's nothing on the entire internet about, I don't know, the death penalty? I find that. I said, well, let's adjust our search terms. What else is the death penalty called? What is a more formal legal kind of term? Then they have to look it up. Oh, capital punishment. Okay. Because you're looking in scholarly journals, they might not be using the term death penalty. Let's think about other terms. Same thing with almost all of the topics that they use. Search terms is we spend a lot of time on search terms because they really have been, as Greg was saying, they're so used to just Google it real quick, just put in the first word, spell it wrong, whatever, and it'll come up. Google will sort of guess. But beyond Google, and Google Scholar we do use sometimes too. There's some good things on there, although sometimes it's hard to access those articles. But we have a standard of credibility that of things that they have to find, so they understand what's a blog and what's a published credible source. We go over relevance, we go over credentials of authors and things. But the search terms are so interesting because different students with the same subject, one will find fantastic results and the other one won't because they're using different words to look. And so that's a really good English class kind of a lesson where we talk about it really does make a difference the way you describe something, and it will lead you on a completely different path. So some students get very frustrated right away. There's nothing, I can't find anything, forget it. This is too hard, or I don't want to read these articles, they're too long, or all that stuff. So they're not really used to being asked to do this. They're coming from, in 10th grade, maybe they were in 9 honors, which does a little bit of this, but some of them weren't, and they're very used to a little bit more of a worksheety, chapter by chapter, let's find a metaphor, sort of an English class structure, where this is almost halfway between English and social studies, and they're sort of confused about the parameters. And so for some students, it's very exciting. For some, it's very frustrating. But, we help them all to get there.
When you have those students that are really frustrated, because I have this as well with the search terms and that, when they get, and for us, sometimes one paper, one abstract will open up a tremendous door for them. And that's those small steps of accomplishment, So here they've had their first bout of failure, like, oh, this is it, it's too hard, I don't know, I might drop. But then if you can keep them going, they get that one, and then it's like, you could see like the recharge, and then the doors sort of open.
When you show them that they can use the bibliography of that article they found, look, this person is referencing these 12 other articles, go look at these. Like, oh, this guy did the research already. Yeah, he did some of it. You have to do some more, but then you're right, that can be motivating when they get frustrated. Also, another big aspect of seminar, and I don't know if it's the same in your class, but there's a lot of group work and a lot of collaboration. So that can go both ways. But for some of the students who are a little more frustrated or more timid or something, depending on their team, the teams can pull each other forward.
It's interesting. It's actually the complete opposite in my course. So each student is really doing their own independent work of anyone else. I haven't had that request. I haven't advertised that they could, but I haven't said that they couldn't either. So we've also only been running this research course this will be the first full real year that it's running. So it's brand new for the marine research program for our school once we brought it research back. But it's going to be very interesting as they're putting the presentations together, because here are students that have been in the same classroom all year long, and I would be shocked if 20% of the students could tell you what any of the other students in the room's project was.
Wow.
Because they are just so focused on what it is they're doing and if they're working. So not all of the projects involve animals or setups in the lab. Some of the students, chose not to do things. So they are, gathering data that's available from other publications and stuff like that. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
so it's a neat experience, and I'm excited for students to present to their classmates, because I think there's going to be a lot of, that's what you've been doing all year long? Like, oh, wow, like, that's so cool. Like, I'm hoping that they get that authentic feedback that I think they will.
That's a key word to the authentic. They're not getting a grade from you as much as they're in front of their peers saying, yeah, this is what I've been working on for a year.
Yep.
And hopefully they're going to be proud of it. And that feedback is going to be, that feedback is going to either say, this was really worth it, and I want to work this hard on other things, or it could go the opposite way.
Yeah.
But that pressure throughout the year, knowing that you're going to do that at the end, the same thing, you have a public presentation at the end also. That, as opposed to a multiple choice test where even if I do badly, not many people will know except my parents and my teacher. It's very different motivation, very, very different feeling to putting yourself out there. And that's what they're doing. They're putting themselves out there to possibly fail. And that's a ton of pressure, but that's what the rest of life is like.
Yeah,
Right.
That's real.
and I have students that will actually, like speaking in public, speaking in front of their peers, forget about it. Like that's I think I read somewhere that was like one of the most fearful things humans do in
I
general.
remember being terrified.
And so, one thing that I've used that's true and I feel really empowers them is I tell them, nobody in this school knows more about your topic than you do. There's nobody that's gonna be able to pick apart what you've done. Like, you are an expert in this field, so you should be proud of that and understand what power that has. They may ask you a question you don't know the answer to, and it's okay. You just say, that's a great question, and I'll get back to you. But as far as, most, they have no idea what it is that you're doing. So, like that sort of seems to give them motivation and take away some of that fear.
When you're teaching skills and you're allowing students to choose their path to demonstrate mastery of those skills, you as a teacher can't possibly know everything about the topics they choose. It's impossible.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You gotta,
Same for you.
Definitely
your
not.
role is very different from I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to know.
Right.
Your role, you're coaching them in a direction that will expose them to challenges that will require them to develop skills. That's where your planning comes in, making sure that those challenges that require those skills are present, but they can look so different for different kids.
So I'm just curious to hear your perspective. So part of my opening spiel to the students is that, this is a very non-traditional class from what you're used to. You, the student, will quickly become more of an expert than I will. And so when I ask questions or we have a conversation, it's authentic, because it's impossible for me to know everything there is to know about seahorses and whale brains and cephalopod eyes and all the other crazy topics that students came up with this year. And they sort of, yeah, until we actually start getting into it. And they're like, all right, Mr. Metzger, what about this? Or, we got, I don't know. Like, what? I have no idea. They're like, what do you mean you don't know? I'm like, I don't know. Like, what do you think? Like, what do we, let's talk about this. And so it's a very interesting dynamic to see that actually become real for the first time for most of my students, that, wow, I am an equal with my teacher, or in some ways, like, more.
There's some
So
areas where I'm the expert.
Yeah, you are the
yeah.
expert.
Yes, I totally agree.
I'm just curious if, you feel that or have gotten
Yeah,
that
I
any-
do, and I think, like you said, for most of them, it's it's not something they're really willing to accept at first. They're like, okay, you're saying that, but I mean, come on, you're still the teacher and I don't know anything. And then even the know-it-alls know that they don't really know anything at first. But then when they get into their topic, and same thing, the first time that I tell them, oh, I'm really not sure. Have you tried this? Or maybe we should look at that. And they start to, at first they're a little unmoored. They're like, but if you don't know, like, how am I supposed to know?
Probably
Like,
think you're
well,
kidding at first.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And you think, well, because you know what skills you need to try to find this out, but I can't find out everything about this topic for you, so you tell me. And they really do get more out of it once they cross that path. A lot of them resist that, as you said, for a little while, but they just don't believe that they could figure out more than you can. They just think someone has to tell me.
Well, because that's their reality up until, what'd you say, 10th grade. The
Yeah.
teacher knows everything,
Yep.
And by the end of the year, they'll have dumped what they know in me, and hopefully I can remember most of it.
And it's hard to maintain that. You don't want to go too far and say, well, I don't know anything. I mean, you don't want them to think that you're just doing crossword puzzles while they're doing all of this research. You have to do that whole guide on the side thing rather than the sage on the stage like routine that they used to say. So like you have to show them, you have to keep redirecting and showing them what they're supposed to be doing. But I think once you get that balance where they realize, okay, you are knowledgeable, and you can be relied on for certain things. If they have questions about grammar or how to write stuff or something
Yeah.
like that, then I'm there. Or if they have questions for you about probably the methods to use, then you're always there for that. But if it's just certain details of the subject matter, then they're going to have to find out themselves.
Right. And, when I read what they're doing or when we have the conversation, I ask questions like, all right, well, there's gaps. Like, you need to find out more information about this, or, this doesn't really make sense the way that you wrote it. So I don't know, because for the last month it's been editing all their papers. So editing. And, I can't. I don't know what you're saying. It doesn't, I can't offer suggestions because I don't know what you're actually trying to say. So can you just explain to me what it is that you're talking about? And then they say, well, this or that. And it's like, oh, okay. So it's been fun for me too, because it's authentic. It's new. I'm learning a lot. But, to see the students achieve what they have, and I have the entire bell curve of students, and which is something that I really wanted to bring with the research course. I didn't want to put an AP distinction, or I didn't want it to get culturally to become one of those classes,
Right.
whatever that was. But I didn't want it to do that. I really wanted it to be a course that anybody could sign up for, at least give it a try. And so for this first full run, I'm really happy with the diversity that we have in there, and I'm really proud of all the work that the students have done. They're at all levels. But that's part of the deal. I mean, that's why a master's program is 2-3 years. A PhD program is 4, 5, 6 years. It just takes time, and so that's also something we're just talking about. Grades in that. Well, there's a checker. There's a finish line, like you have to get across. And my paper's not done. I analyzed 20% of my data. I only analyzed an hour of data. I got 120 hours to analyze. It's like, it's okay. Like, this is a model. We only have 8 months to get this all done. Like, yeah, if you want to come back next year, you can continue working with, your data, but do you have enough to say something about, the answer to your question? Yeah. All right, good, go with it, because we have to write the paper, we have to get it edited, then you have to put your presentation together and deliver your presentation. There's only a month of school left, so like it's okay you didn't finish. This is an exercise in
real
the
life.
activity.
Yeah.
So
And the research on project-based learning really focuses a lot on the revision process as being part of this kind of deep learning. And I'm sure in AP Seminar, there's a ton of
Yes.
that, as you just expressed in your classes. That doesn't really exist. It does exist in English classes, where you'll get your paper back and there'll be things you need to correct, or there'll be a conference to talk about what needs to happen. But in general, in K through 12 education, it isn't a major emphasis,
No.
And I think that's one of the things, you talk about students having to adjust to these classes. I'd like to dig in a little bit to what we could do prior to these classes so it wouldn't have to be such an adjustment. Because I truly believe it's deeper learning. It's learning that is truly preparing them for whatever their future holds. The skill set that they're going to develop in these type of scenarios is going to be helpful. Much more so than pretty much anything you can grade with a multiple choice test. Never been a big fan of multiple choice tests. But, so what would you like to see shift in K through 12 education so that students didn't have to adjust to this type of learning? And I'm not saying everything needs to change, but what could be emphasized? What could we shift in a direction that would have students more comfortable with, here's something you're going to work on and you're responsible for it and it's yours?
Well, yeah, I think that's where I would start. I would say more choice, more voice, like just from as early on as once that obviously, but even in the very early elementary stages, I think that, I have 3 kids and they're going through school and my youngest is in 4th grade and my oldest is in 10th grade. So they're all at different stages, and my middle one is in 7th grade. And in each of my oldest is actually in the AP seminar class, although not in my section, but I'm seeing it from both sides this year, which is very interesting for me. It's a whole nother show. Like, for example, for my 4th grader, they're just at that whole, in 3rd grade, I think English teachers usually say you go from learning to read to reading to learn is kind of the shift. So 4th grade is also, now you're getting different kind of content reading. Earlier than that, you're just trying to master reading. But now that you know how to read, you're being asked to just read in a lot of different subject areas, and kind of that's where a lot of stratification starts to happen. The kids who aren't really strong readers start to fall behind in math, even with all those word problems. They start to fall behind social studies, everything, even science. It can be affected in all the different areas. And I find a lot of young kids turned off to reading because they're reading the same book that they have that I probably read in 4th grade, and you're spending a whole week on every chapter and you're every single word. And I'm not disparaging how any individual teacher teaches or whatever, or any curriculum, but it's just that if maybe the class did a class book and then they got to choose a book, it's something, master the skills, but let them have some say. Put graphic novels in there, put other kind of things in there that get to different kind of learners. Don't tell everybody this is the only way that you're a good reader if you can read this, you're a good writer if you can write this much. I think the kids label themselves pretty early on.
Oh, God, yeah.
And they, even if the teachers aren't doing it, you get that sense and you decide, I'm not good at this or that, I'm not that kind of kid. And it's so hard to undo later on. And by the time they get up to high school, they've already decided that they're either not interested in this or they're not good at this and they can't do it. So if they just got to pursue some level of interest in each subject just a little bit, I think it would help a lot.
I think, and this isn't an individual teacher problem. This is a system problem.
Absolutely.
So it's not like teachers are doing what the hierarchy, the administrators, the system is telling them to do. And I feel like in K through 3, when they're learning to read, they're also learning to be good students.
Right.
And that's much more about being compliant and doing what you're told than being what happens if I do this? And I'd much rather the kid who says, what happens if I do this? And with that natural curiosity that we all have, that we tend to
Suppress.
Thank you. I couldn't think of the right word, suppress, in those earlier grades because we're looking for an orderly situation. And I'm not sure that learning is orderly. It's different for each person.
Sure.
Some people need step 1, 2, 3. Some people can start at step 1 and say, oh, but this step over here at 5, that's really interesting, and then they can work backwards from that. There's lots of different ways to do it. But we ingrain kids in education by saying, here's how it's done. And it works for a lot of people, but there's a lot of students who it doesn't work for, who I think wind up being that frustrated, I'm not good at this, and they might be really smart. They might be really bright. They might be our best students, I've often told other administrators that some of our smartest kids are probably in detention right now because they push on the edges,
Right.
which is where new learning happens. But that, again, it's an entire system that is set up to be compliance-centered. I feel like our whole, and I think that's something that these classes get to the edges of.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can't, I can't keep every one of my research kids doing in the same area at the same time in the same way, because just the nature of the authenticity, they move at different paces. Some of the smartest, hardworking students that I have in the research class actually progressed through the entire process the least. Not because they couldn't do it, or certainly not because they weren't putting effort into it, but because the nature of the way they went after it, the sophistication of their topic, the data that they were collecting and analyzing, they just ran out of time in this 184 days to get it done. I said, and that was like freaking them out because I'm not done. Like, I'm not done. And I have this paper to write, and I have to write do the presentation. But in their brain, they're thinking that the paper and the presentation has to be on the complete and total package. And you could just see the weight go off their shoulders when we had the conversation about this isn't a class and an exercise of the activity. It's not about finishing the race, it's about going through the process. And so that's where, it's okay, you only have 20% of your data analyzed. Like, write up what you know. You have, at the end of your discussion, you can say more research is needed or more time was needed. That's what the purpose of the discussion is to tell the reader, where you're at and why you're there. So, those I can guarantee those conversations I had was the first time those students have ever had that, because you got to finish. It's all in a box. Like, I got to get to chapter 22, or that's the end of the book. It's like.
But at the same time, I would say too that I totally have the same experience, but you also can't just say, well, every kid should be able to choose what they want to learn and express it however they want. Clearly, that would be chaotic. And so it's difficult to, I don't have all the answers to how you have to introduce a framework, even at the beginning of the year for their first research topic. When we say you can research what you want, they're like, like what?
Right.
What do you mean? Anything? And shoe, book, chair. Their brains, there are too many choices. And so they need some sort of a framework where you say, well, for example, this, or that, or something, that's what the teaching part comes in.
That's where
we have to structure the learning in a way that allows for some sort of measurability or uniformity in some way that we're all working towards the same thing.
Right.
There is, in your class, there is a rubric that says, here's what we want you to learn this year, and
Yeah.
here's how we're going to determine whether you learned it, or the level to which you learned it.
Yeah.
They
Right.
get that right up front.
Yeah.
So there is focus on specific skills that need to be learned, and how you're going to demonstrate it. So there is, and you have to have that framework.
Right.
If you don't have that, it is
it's
chaos.
chaos.
And we're not looking for chaos.
Yeah, and the structure in my course is by the quarters. So first quarter, by the end of first quarter, you have to have your question. By the end of second quarter, you have to have your materials and methods written. So how are you going to collect the data on paper? By the end of third quarter, you've collected your data. And by the end of fourth quarter, you have finalized your paper and given your presentation. So it's struck. So if you get your question in the first 2 weeks, well, now your 8 weeks, now you're immediately going to start writing your materials and methods. Right. If it took you 9 weeks to get your question, then you're following that path. So that's why quickly students start to go in all different directions and follow all different types of timelines based on where they're at. And so that's the structure of my course is, what you need to be doing next. Like when you complete this task, then the next task is this. And then, there's a hard stop on data collection at the end of third quarter because you really only have about 8 weeks of actual classwork out of the last 10 for fourth quarter. And there's a lot of, writing papers and giving the presentation takes time, so.
Do you find students who are successful students in traditional classrooms, when they come into this setting, they're constantly coming up to you saying, is this right?
Yeah.
Is this right? Can I move on to the next? They have to know that what they have is correct before they can take another step.
Some. I would say, though, that lessens as the year goes by. I don't know if that's the
Sure.
same with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It starts out very heavy.
Yeah.
And then they either trust themselves more or they realize, which would be even better, that would be good, but even better, they realize that every single thing doesn't have to be right, that they have to know that they're on the right path.
Keep moving. Keep moving forward.
They
Keep
have to
moving
progress.
forward. Yeah.
One other thing that based your question earlier about what else needs to change, I would also, because collaboration is a required built-in part of seminar, there's these two big tasks they have to do. And the first task is they have to form a group, and each they have to come up with a topic. So let's say it's something about climate change or something. And then each person within the group has to choose a different lens about that topic to research. So the economic effects or the historical thing or something like that. And then they have to give a group presentation, and that's required. And everyone in the group gets the same score. And the second whole task is individual and all that. But doing that is very stressful for them because a lot of these kids are high achievers. They don't want their score dependent on anyone else. And even though the students push back the most about that, and I've experimented, the other teacher, Mrs. McNish, and I've experimented with, we form the groups, they form the groups, we sort of form the groups, we let them choose one person with it, no matter how you do it. It's stressful for the students because I don't think they've collaborated very effectively before. All kids have been in groups, but you know how that usually goes, especially when you're younger. One kid does everything, one kid does nothing. The other kid is stressed out but tries to help but gets shut down because the kid who wants to do everything doesn't listen to anyone else's idea. There's a lot of dynamics that come out. And they'll say every year without fail, why do we have to do this? Can't I just do my own? I know what I'm doing. Can you just let me show you? And you say, but this is a life skill. Do you think I work all by myself? Do you think anyone in this building does, or in any other place? Some of them have summer jobs, whatever you do, you really have to work with other people, and not everyone is going to do an equal amount of work, and you have to figure out how you're going to negotiate that. And that is a hard thing to teach, but if they had more group work that was consequential, a little bit like earlier on, or if they did different things where you saw the strengths and weaknesses of teammates as something you could work with rather than, oh God, not a group project. I feel like a lot of people sort of shut down when they hear that. I just wish they were more comfortable with that before they came in.
I agree, and it's really hard in the younger grades because you want to cover what you've been told you're supposed to cover that year. You've got this curriculum, and you might have this state test at the end, and those are all weighty factors. So to allow students to struggle with learning how to work together when that's not going to be tested.
Right.
And it
Which
takes
is- which is-
time
I was gonna say,
away
it's
from
time
your
consuming.
It's
184
time consuming.
days.
It's probably one of the most important skills we can get to our students. I think it would go a long way towards their self-esteem, their all those social-emotional skills that we worry about so much now. They're all embedded in working in a group. But because it's not on a test, we feel we can't devote the time to it, which
It's a catch-22. I always say that if I taught regions, I wouldn't be able to teach the way that I do, because you have to cover certain amounts of material. But now, we've done a tremendous amount of effort, put a lot of effort into revamping our curriculums in the different disciplines at our school. So I'm having these more collegial, professional conversations with others. And I think there's a way that you could have project-based learning and still cover the box of content that you would have to in a Regents course or an AP course.
Yes.
But it would require a tremendous amount of effort on a group of teachers, because I don't know if any one teacher would have the capacity to come up with these semi-structured, open-ended units that would hedge the bets in covering all of the content on their own. I think it would take a village to raise that child. I think it's doable.
I
But
100% think it's doable.
It would take a tremendous amount of effort from administration to provide the time and buy-in from the teachers to take the time to really do this correctly. There's no doubt that project-based learning is absolutely the way to go. The problem is the way that, the box that we're confined to in our current education system. So I think you could do both, but it would take a tremendous amount of effort in the beginning to come up with the structure for the course to be able to do both.
I agree. I do think that the new standards, especially the science standards, lend themselves more
Yes.
to project-based learning than the previous standards. which were-
100%. There's
it's-
definitely that shift is
It's
moving.
no longer, here's the stuff you have to know, but now they've shifted to, here's the things you have to be able to do.
Correct. It's definitely moving in the right direction.
So you cannot cover a specific life of a cephalopod,
Right.
You can skip that and still get to all the skills that they need to know in that point in their growth.
Right. The problem that I see sort of happening now with it is so for the last, 120 years, we've been teaching this, content.
Right.
And now the tests are changing to concepts. But the 10th graders have had 11 years of content. And now in 1 year, they're asked to shift to now.
Yes.
And the rollout, I'm nervous of the rollout. Like, it's good to have this shift, but it should start in kindergarten and roll through. Don't try to change the wheel as the car's going down the road right now. And I'm nervous that the good is going to get it's going to get thrown out with the rollout.
I understand, and it's definitely scary. But when I wholeheartedly believe that this type of instruction is better for kids, maybe not for their grade at the end of that quarter, but for the rest of their life, beyond academics, I would hate to not make a shift for a 6th grader or an 8th grader. When I know, yes, there may be a year or two that's a tough adjustment, but then they would still get some of this type of deep education that they would have missed out on totally. I think their success in college, for those who choose to go to college, I think the success in college would go up significantly. Right now, people don't want to look at the success of students in college. We don't advertise that because it's not very good. Nationally, it's probably about 50% graduate.
I might have some more data soon on this topic because I also teach Regents. I teach English 11, which is the Regents year. And just this year, based on taking that course last year, I built in a unit of like a tentative, it's a short PBL unit at the beginning of English 11. And I had to get buy-in. There's 2 other teachers who teach that as well, and new principal, new administration and stuff. And everyone was on board with it because it was just a standalone unit. It's not like I'm changing it. We're still doing Gatsby and Hamlet, and we're still doing all the traditional stuff. But in order to come up with it, it was a little bit difficult to come up with the content because English 11 is, the required class, and we have a wide range of learners. And there's a lot of kids there who are either not interested in going to college or maybe that's not in their future. So I can't base everything on this is important for college. So the concept that we did was what you're going to do is in groups or alone, take a choice there, try to make an argument for something that you should be taught about in English class that you're not. What do you need to know about? What should you be taught about in school? Then I sort of made it outside of just English class because some of them are coming up with some really different stuff. I want to learn about investing. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. So I opened it up a little, I kind of responded, but a lot of them wanted to know about gap years, or they want, what else can you do besides college? A lot of them wanted to know about trade schools. A lot of them wanted to know some writing stuff about, or how do you write better? How do you interview? Things that are useful and specific and that sometimes are touched upon in school, but oddly sometimes are actually not mentioned at all. And so that ended up being a really interesting unit for me. I'm not sure how I could make that sort of thing, go the whole year round, but that worked into a Regents class because we did a little research. We did some writing with it so that we could go over some writing skills that they're going to need on the essays and stuff. So it was, I realized that English is probably an easier subject to adapt rather than a social studies or a science where you have units that you have to cover. For us, it's more that it's more skills based anyway.
Yeah.
However, there's still a lot of traditions there that are hard to change.
Yeah. And just to go back to throw my 2 cents in for the question as what could change. And I would just say this type of example, you don't have to fundamentally shift everything overnight. If you could get buy-in from the teachers from K to 12 to implement even just a single unit with, authentic learning and give them that opportunity, I think that is something. So at least if they saw it once every year, it wouldn't be such a new thing. And then if, as teachers progress or as they like it or they buy into it, then you could implement more units as they came either into your brain, or you went to a professional development and learned about it. So that would be my suggestion, is just to for every teacher to be aware of a place to implement an authentic project-based learning experience.
Well, the research on systemic change, trying to get a whole system to move in this direction, would say you can't just say, okay, we're doing it this way now. That's impossible.
Yeah.
The way to do it is exactly what you're trying and you were talking about. You're doing one unit, doing it well, finding out what worked and what didn't work, revamping it, and then when you're comfortable with that, adding another unit. But you can't, you have to learn as a teacher how to teach differently and how to think about your standards that you're teaching differently. I don't know how many of the great works of literature are listed in the standards as something you need to teach?
Not specifically, there's no requirement. We don't have to
Right.
teach any of them. However, the thought is you have to get them used to that language, because on the Regents, those are the passages that come up. So we can't just read Peanuts cartoons all year, because they're going to have to understand how to read a
Right.
Mark Twain passage at the end.
Right.
But you're right. Technically, there's not a required thing that you have to teach in 11th grade.
So there could be more voice and choice in, you could set the bar as far as the quality of the literature,
Right.
but there could be voice and choice on the actual, what I'm going to read to learn about metaphor.
It's just, not to tell the obvious, but it's what Greg was talking about before. It's a lot more work for the
Oh,
teacher.
yeah.
So that's the pushback from people.
Would you need to know everything about each piece of literature they chose? Probably not, but it's really hard to give up that control.
Right, and that was going to
That's
be my last
really,
part. Is
really hard.
It does take a special person to be able to release and give the students that freedom. Like, there are some people just don't have that in their personality to be able to feel comfortable doing that. So, again, that's where if you could do it in a tiny little piece,
Yes.
and then slowly chip away
Well,
at it. But
we're
there
talking
is-
about student learning this whole time, and really now we've shifted it, at the same topic, we're talking about adult learning,
Right.
okay? And it's not going to happen because somebody told you to do it and you're going to now do it. You have to develop a whole skill set, which takes time and takes mistakes, which teachers don't handle well. We're not used to, we're not comfortable with, this didn't go well today in my lesson. We don't look at it as, oh, I know, look at what I could have done there, and all you learn from that mistake. We beat ourselves up because it didn't go the way I planned it, or I made a mistake. So there's a lot of learning to go on within us
Yep.
before the system can shift to this type of instruction. And it's hard. And it's hard. We've had conversations about this throughout the last few years of my career, that I've been pushing on this for years. And a lot of people put a lot of work in, and it's still really, really difficult. Okay? Last thing I want to talk about, what other systemic barriers are there to this type of instruction?
Well, I think a lot of the grade structure can be. The AP seminar is particularly hard to grade, because there are quite a few of their projects that, once they're at a certain point, we're not supposed to be giving them feedback anymore. It's supposed to be just assessed by the College Board. So we're supposed to sort of just gently guide, and it feels sort of artificial to put a grade sometimes on some of these things that are in development. And I would love to, if there could be more of a portfolio-based grading system for, not for every class at every point, but just moving in that direction where you're just looking at, where were you then, where are you now? But the constant kind of arbitrary, almost little quizzes and tests and things like that, I think I'm not sure really what they're measuring sometimes, and I think that they can also distract from what you're really trying to do, which is, move forward.
We're almost out of time. I just want to say one quick thing. One barrier I see is our schedule, which is like,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother topic.
good
We
one.
could probably do a whole show on that. And before we're out of time, I'd just like to thank the East Hampton Education Foundation for their support of this series. They've provided scholarships and grants to all of our East Hampton schools since 2005. I'd like to thank you both for being here and sharing your opinions. Again, there's no concrete answer to how we're going to shift in this direction, but I do think it's something worth exploring.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.